Welcome to Meet the Press Now. I'm Kristen Welker in Washington, and we begin with breaking news at Fort Stewart in Georgia, an Army base just 40 miles southwest of Savannah, where early this afternoon a gunman opened fire. Moments ago, Army officials just provided an update. The alleged shooter has been identified as Cornelius Radford. He was an active duty soldier who worked on the base. Here's more of what officials said.
This morning, shortly before 11 o'clock, an active duty soldier assigned to Fort Stewart, Georgia, shot and wounded 5 of his fellow soldiers here on Fort Stewart. Thankfully, all are in stable condition and all are expected to recover. The alleged shooter is in custody. I know that his soldiers in the area that witnessed the shooting immediately and without hesitation tackled the soldier, subdued him, that allowed law enforcement to then take him into custody.
This is a photo of the alleged shooter from an arrest earlier this year for a DUI. Army officials said the alleged shooter did not use a military weapon, and they believe it was a personal handgun. They don't know what his motivations were at this point. Officials also adding the lockdown has been lifted and there is no active threat to the community. Now, the White House saying President Trump has been briefed on the incident, and Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem also saying she's actively monitoring the situation. In a statement, Georgia Governor Brian Kemp said he was saddened by the tragedy at Fort Stewart and his office remains in close contact with law enforcement on the ground. Joining me now is NBC News senior national security correspondent Courtney Kube at the Pentagon, NBC News national law enforcement and intelligence correspondent Tom Winter. And in a moment, we'll be joined by Jim Kavanaugh, retired ATF special agent in charge and an NBC News law enforcement analyst. Courtney, I want to start with you. You've been working your sources. What more can you tell us about this incident and the soldier who was identified as the alleged gunman?
Yeah, we know a little bit more about the soldier himself, a sergeant. He joined the Army in the active duty in January of 2018, so he's been in just over 7 years, going on 8 years. He worked in the sustainment brigade with the 2nd Armored Brigade Combat Team. That's the unit, part of the 3rd Infantry Division down at Fort Stewart. Basically, his job, Kristen, was logistical support, keeping up the supply chain to other troops. Now, we know, according to the general there who just briefed last hour, that the soldiers who were involved in this shooting were in his fellow unit. These are the people that he served with day in and day out. And one thing I was really struck by from that briefing, Kristen, is the fact that other soldiers are actually the ones who subdued him after he started shooting. They tackled him. They waited until law enforcement were able to take him down. Now, you mentioned that he was using his own handgun. This was not a military-issued weapon. But we also have learned, according to this one-star general, that, in fact, he had no history of any kind of disciplinary issues within his background in the military. Now, they're still looking into that. You mentioned the DUI. It appears that he did not report that up to his commanders at the time that it occurred. They've just recently learned about that. But beyond that, like I said, the Army saying that there were no other indications of behavioral issues that they're aware of at this point. Now, he's being held right now in pretrial confinement there at Fort Stewart. At this point, we expect that this case will be handled within the military court of justice. That means because he is a soldier, the individuals involved, the victims are soldiers, and it occurred on a military base, we expect that even though the investigation itself will probably be more broad than just the Army CID and other military law enforcement, that at this point he will likely face criminal justice within the U.S. military's courts, Kristen.
So, Courtney, those are really notable details there. Where do you think this investigation goes from here at this point?
I think it's really telling that despite the fact that the base has been clear for movement for several hours now, that the 2nd ABCT complex where the shooting occurred remains on lockdown. I suspect that's because this will be an intensive and thorough investigation. The big question they will be looking for is, how did he get this weapon on base, Kristen? The reality is, if he had access to the base, even though troops and civilians and contractors, anyone who comes on and off the base, are not supposed to have a weapon with them when they enter the base, and they're supposed to declare if they do for some sort of an official reason, the reality is this whole incident shows how it can be pretty simple for someone with base access to get a weapon onto the base. And as we see here, with very dangerous consequences, that'll be a big part of this investigation. But then again, I think one of the biggest questions remains the motive here. Why did he open fire on, as we learned just last hour, on the people who he was probably working with day in and day out there at Fort Stewart?
Well, and this all Just to follow up on that point, Courtney, I mean, you would anticipate they'd have pretty strong security at a military base like Fort Stewart. Can you walk us through what security there would look like?
Absolutely. So they would not only have the overall perimeter security, you know, whether it's a fence, a wall, there will also be the gates where you can access the base. Those would have military police on them. There will be military police patrolling. At various parts of the base, there are likely additional security gates that you have to go through. So as you said, extensive security. You can't just get on there as a member of the public. You have to have base access to get on. But Kristen, remember, it's not just people who would be working there. The 10,000 or so military service members, civilians, and contractors who go on and off the base every day. There would also be potentially family members, including children, who would be coming on and off the base, whether to shop, maybe to go to daycare there. And then veterans would have access also to do their shopping or maybe even to go to their medical care there. So a lot of people coming on and off the base every single day. It just shows how the potential for someone to sneak a weapon on in this case, it shows a big loophole in what is generally a very secure military installation.
Absolutely, a terrifying loophole at that. Courtney Kube, thank you so much. I know you've been on this since we first learned about the shooting. Thank you for bringing us up to speed. Tom Winter, let me turn to you. Courtney, talking about the investigation, what kind of information do you think investigators will be looking for at this point in time, given that he was with the military and was stationed on the base?
Right, that's right, Kristen. And so one of the things that we've learned from the press conference that we just had within the last hour or so coming from officials there on base is that, in fact, this individual, this Sergeant Radford, is talking to Army investigators. So, I mean, that's a great thing right off the bat from an investigative standpoint. You're looking at a photo taken here. This is a booking photo tied to that DUI charge that you were referring to earlier. So the fact that he's going to be talking to them could obviously be very helpful from a standpoint of motive. What was the reason for this? What was his state of mind? How did he get that weapon on base? You know, some of the questions that you and Courtney were just talking about. So that's going to be really helpful. They'll do all the forensic work because they have to do that anyway. And then, of course, you know, if there's an issue about that gun and whether or not it was purchased legally, whether he should have had it legally or not, that'll obviously be addressed as well. The DUI charge against him, was he eligible to still have that weapon on his person? That all needs to be looked into, not just by law enforcement, by us as our job as reporters. So those are some initial questions that they'll want to tackle. Obviously, if he obtained the gun illegally, did somebody sell it to him illegally? That's going to be a focus for investigators as well. But I think otherwise, this is pretty self-contained at this point. The military seems to have what they believe to be a pretty good handle on the facts.
Well, and to that point, Tom, does the fact that it's actually happened on a military base impact how the investigation is conducted, the speed with which it's conducted?
Well, very much so. I mean, first off, there's an entirely different apparatus for investigating it. We're not going to have a press conference soon with a local district attorney talking about this particular incident, perhaps if there are other charges elsewhere. It's going to be investigated with the help, if need be, of the FBI, who's obviously been aware of this and on top of it since it happened. They've put out statements to that effect. The ATF, if need be, and other federal agencies. So they'll look at all of that, Kristen, and work with Army CID. But you know, most times I would say, okay, you know, maybe in a couple hours we'll get some initial charging information, then we'll get a booking photo, then we'll get this and that. That's not going to be the case here. It's going to be contained within the military system. Presumably, they may have some other options as far as compelling individuals to talk. Potentially, there's just, you know, kind of a different approach to this entirely. At the end of the day, they believe they have the person responsible for the crime. They're talking to this person. So there's also a lot of commonality and similarities with other active shooter incidents that we see, unfortunately, all too often.
All right, Tom Winter, thank you so much for your great reporting. Jim Cavanaugh, let me turn to you and what officials are saying. This extraordinary revelation that the suspect and the victims were co-workers. How significant is that in the investigation, and what does that tell you?
Well, it gives the Army CID agents a lot of information, and they have all the background of the assailant. Kristen, they know who he is. They have all his military files, and he's cooperating, as Tom just reported. So he's in there singing like he's at an audition for, you know, his show. And this is his show. I mean, this is spree, his thing he's wanting to do. You know, it'll be interesting to see if he turns out to be suicidal, like about half of these guys are. Although he didn't kill himself. That's an interesting fact as well, like the shooter just did in New York last week, shot his victims and then killed himself. This guy did not. And we'll see what the reasons for that are. He was apprehended by other soldiers. They talked about a 40-minute delay. So I don't know if he ran, he was chased, or what happened. They didn't give us those facts, but the commanding general did give us a lot of facts. He told us it was a handgun. It was a privately owned handgun. ATF will be tracing that. Probably has already done it, an urgent trace, and providing that to CID. It's just an interesting fact that the Secretary of the Army is also the director of ATF. So his desk is going to be busy with all the facts landed on it today, and wanting to protect his soldiers in Fort Stewart. I've been on that base. I've worked with the Army Explosive Ordnance people there. They're great. It's like a city. I mean, it's a city, really. You know, 50,000 people moving around there. And, you know, if you're a member of the military or even a civilian employee, you can get on the base with a handgun, of course, because they have different levels of security depending on what's happening in the world and how their deployments are and what the threat level. So normally operating, you know, it's just you're ordered not to bring the gun on, but you're not searched every time you come on. And certainly if you're a sergeant, you can come on with your backpack and you could secrete a handgun. So that could happen. But this soldier did not report his DUI, which he had recently, and he's required to do that to his commanding officer. So there may be some spiraling down of him. That would probably end his career. Mess up his career for sure, a DUI. So maybe he was having some other difficulties and he decided he was going to take it out on his fellow soldiers. Is it revenge? Is it a power grab? Is suicide a leitmotif in the case? I think that's interesting. We'll see. It's probably going to be prosecuted by the military and their courts. Because it's all military, the shooter and all the victims. So, and it happened on the base. So that's where it'll be prosecuted.
Jim, just to follow up with you, I mean, the fact that he had a DUI, how significant is that, and what questions does it raise for you in addition to the ones that you're laying out?
Well, you know, when you enter into the federal service, the civilian service, or especially military and law enforcement service, you know, if you get arrested, you're required to report that to your superiors immediately. The police often report it to the military, but you're required as well. You can't hide that from your superiors. You've got to go in immediately and say, I was arrested last night for this or that, because it may affect your service. And, you know, he apparently did not do that because the general at the press conference, Kristen, he said, we just found out about it after the shooting today. We just found out he was arrested recently for a DUI. So what stuck out to me there is, yeah, the Army didn't know about it from the local sheriff maybe, but the sergeant was required to report it to his commanding officer. Why didn't he report it? And so that he was hiding it from them. So something's going on in his life, and then, you know, is he realizing that something's happening, and, you know, he decides to act out here, bring his pistol in, and, you know, he's blaming it on his coworkers. You know, Kristen, the thing is, when it gets in people's mind, it doesn't even make sense to us when we hear about it. It's like the person from Las Vegas who drove to the NFL office in New York City, and he wanted to shoot up the NFL because he thought that they had caused his brain trauma. So it doesn't have to make sense. It's just what they think they want to act on.
All right, Jim Kavanaugh, thank you so much. It's always wonderful to have your perspective on these incredibly difficult days. Thanks so much for being here. We are following this incident closely, and we'll bring you any major developments as we get them. Coming up, the president struggles to turn the page on the Jeffrey Epstein saga amid new subpoenas and pressure for more information. Plus, U.S. Special Envoy Steve Witkoff meets with Russian President Putin in Moscow on the war in Ukraine. The takeaways from those talks as President Trump prepares for a potential face-to-face meeting with the Russian leader himself. Do stay with us. You're watching Meet the Press Now. Welcome back. We're following more breaking news. The White House says President Trump could meet with Russian President Vladimir Putin. A White House official telling NBC News that the president could meet with his Russian counterpart as early as next week if Putin also agrees to meet with Ukrainian President Zelensky. A European official tells NBC News that Mr. Trump told European leaders on a call earlier that he plans to meet in person with Putin soon to discuss a possible ceasefire. Now, the news comes hours after the president's special envoy, Steve Witkoff, wrapped up a meeting with Putin in Moscow. The president calling that meeting highly productive on social media. Joining me now is NBC News White House correspondent Monica Alba and NBC News reporter Matt Bodner. Thanks to both of you for being here. So, Monica, what are your sources telling you about when and where this potential meeting could take place? This is big news.
Yeah, and those are the big questions, Kristen. You know as well as I do that setting up a meeting between two major world leaders in any circumstance requires a lot of moving pieces, a lot of infrastructure, a lot of planning. So the idea that President Trump could meet with President Putin as early as next week, I'm told, is very significant, but it is still unclear how and when that would happen. And a big part of that condition is this idea that President Trump relayed to Steve Witkoff after he briefed him on the meeting that, yes, he's open to meeting with President Putin in person, but that he also wants to see if President Putin will meet with Ukrainian President Zelensky as well to discuss a possible ceasefire for the war in Ukraine. That's an important piece to all of this. But in terms of some potential venues, we know, for instance, that the Turkish President Erdogan has offered Istanbul as a venue. A couple of weeks ago, he said he wanted to help broker the talks. That's maybe one possibility. And in addition to that, the Vatican, the Pope, has also offered to potentially host those kinds of conversations as he has pushed for peace in recent weeks and months as well. So are those two possibilities? We just simply don't know. I'm told nothing has been locked down. And with timing, we know these things can slide, and that's a distinct possibility here as well. But it would obviously be a notable step as the president gave President Putin that 50-day deadline. He shortened it to 10 days. That's set to expire on Friday. But he is touting this great progress that was made in these diplomatic talks today in Moscow. So we'll see where that ultimately lands for future meetings.
We sure will. We know, Monica, of course, that President Trump also spoke with President Zelensky yesterday. Any key takeaways from that call? And was this meeting, do you know, a part of that call?
I think that they have loosely been discussing the possibility of some kind of summit for a while. We know that President Trump has really expressed his disappointment with President Putin, but he's really been firm about trying to see if there could be some kind of talks that could be scheduled with President Zelensky. So I think it stands to reason that they discuss these next steps or where this goes from here, in addition to this larger conversation in economic terms that the president is trying to levy these secondary sanctions and tariffs on countries that are doing business with Russia and that they say, the U.S. and the president argue, are fueling the Russian war machine. And we know that that has been a topic of conversation with President Zelensky as well. So this is a situation where the president is pushing for a major diplomatic breakthrough. He says after trying to do similar deals with other countries where he has had some success on stopping fighting elsewhere. But on the scale of the war in Ukraine, this would really be another level of diplomacy from this president. But he's trying to see if he can make some kind of impact there.
All right, Monica Alba at the White House, thank you so much for your great reporting, as always. Matt Bodner, let me turn to you now. Let's talk about the signals that we are getting from the Kremlin. Is there a sense that Vladimir Putin may be serious about meeting with Trump? As Monica just pointed out, this has been something that's been under discussion for quite some time.
Well, thank you, Kristen. Yes, I mean, the Kremlin really has wanted a meeting with President Trump for a long time. There's no doubt, really, in my mind, that this is something that's come up each time Witkoff has gone to Moscow. But they haven't yet really had a chance to respond to these latest developments out of the White House. Essentially, that's by design. Today's meeting and sort of the chronology of events was a bit interesting. There was some potentially mixed signaling. But, you know, really all we have from the Kremlin at this point comes from Putin's foreign policy advisor. His name is Yuri Ushakov. And he did put out a vague statement earlier today that's saying, you know, beyond the topic of Ukraine, the two sides discussed the prospects of a strategic partnership between the U.S. and Russia. That's a bid at restoring business ties, most likely. But really the important takeaway from Ushakov's statement was in reference to the signals from Trump on the Ukraine issue and the war by Friday, today. He said that Putin's fully aware of the situation. He said that Putin gave his own signals to Trump via Witkoff. That now appears to be this idea, let's meet. He wouldn't talk about what that was just yet. He wanted Witkoff to go talk to Trump, give them a chance to discuss this meeting, put out their own statements, and basically said, we'll comment on this tomorrow. So I think we won't hear very much from the Kremlin until tomorrow morning. But it is important to keep in mind, Witkoff, before going to Moscow, had referred to these conversations as Russia's last chance to reach a deal before the U.S. moved forward with various threats to impose sanctions. So it did appear things could be at a tense stage. But again, we really do need to hear more from the Kremlin tomorrow.
And Matt, talk about the role that Witkoff has played. He has met with Vladimir Putin 3 times now. He's been significant in trying to move these talks forward.
Absolutely. I mean, he's been basically the shuttle diplomat here, and he liaises a lot with a very similar figure in the Kremlin, a man who's sort of been around in Moscow for a while, Kirill Dmitriev. He actually was sort of the spokesman for the Russian COVID vaccine. But his star has risen significantly as essentially the liaison to Witkoff. And a lot of that early discussion we saw between the Trump administration and the Kremlin when Trump first came to office, a lot of the friendlier tones was facilitated by Dmitriev via Witkoff. And the two of them definitely seemed to hit it off. But he is the point man. He is the guy pushing this forward for the White House. And it is interesting. There were also some statements by Dmitriev today that were fundamentally different in tone from Ushakov's statements, sort of suggesting that dialogue is happening, dialogue is possible. So the two of them do appear to be talking. And again, it's going to be very interesting tomorrow what, for example, the Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov has to say about these latest developments.
It sure will be. And all of those tea leaves, so important. Matt Bodner, thank you so much, as always, for your fantastic reporting. We really appreciate it. Well, we are expecting to hear from President Trump this hour when he announces a major investment by Apple in the U.S. economy from the Oval Office. It comes just hours before new tariffs on dozens of U.S. trading partners begin taking effect. Today, the president also announcing a doubling of tariffs in India as punishment for buying Russian oil. The economic news coming as the White House is plagued by new headlines in the Jeffrey Epstein saga. After the House Oversight Committee issued a series of subpoenas to the Justice Department demanding it hand over case files, in addition to documents and testimony from former government officials. Vice President J.D. Vance, meanwhile, is expected to hold a strategy session at his residence this evening on the matter, which will include Attorney General Pam Bondi and other top administration officials. And the Justice Department is now considering releasing the transcripts of its 2-day interview with Epstein accomplice Ghislaine Maxwell. Back with me now is NBC's Tom Winter. Tom, thanks so much for joining me. Really appreciate it. So there's been so much discussion about this. What are the potential ramifications of releasing the Justice Department's interview with Ghislaine Maxwell?
So, Kristen, I look at our jobs, and of course, we earn a living, but our job really is to represent our audience. And the best way that I can do that is get as much information as possible. So reporters are salivating at the idea that it would be possible that for so many years, my entirety of my career, getting an interview that the Justice Department and the FBI might have done with somebody that is not included eventually in either a court filing or some sort of exhibit at trial, that's like next to impossible. So the idea that they're going to set the precedent of doing this is something that really has reporters' attention, because it's typically one of the most kind of behind-the-wall records that exists. It's just really hard to get. It's very unusual, and the idea that it would be put out as a transcript, perhaps with a recording as well, obviously the potential for more information from Maxwell to get out there is large. I would also point out, though, it's not clear to us, was there a lot of adversarial questioning? In other words, did the Justice Department really push back on some of her assertions? I mention that because, of course, Maxwell was charged with perjury in a 2016 deposition involved in some of the civil litigation against her. Prosecutors ultimately did not pursue those charges because she had already been convicted of sex trafficking and other related charges, including with girls as young as the age of 14. So this is somebody who's had according to prosecutors, a very difficult relationship with the truth over the years. And of course, the challenge is this comes out and now she's allowed to effectively have a platform for herself. It's going to require a lot of reporting and a lot of fact checking.
Well, you know, the other piece of this story that we're watching and that you've been reporting on so extensively, Tom, is the fact that the Justice Department has faced scrutiny for transferring Maxwell to a minimum security prison in Texas. Some other big names in that prison complex. How common is this? How unusual is the move?
Yeah, it's highly uncommon. I can't stress that enough. I've been doing this for over a decade. I've talked to people that have been doing it twice as long. This is not something that typically happens for somebody who's been convicted of the types of charges that Ghislaine Maxwell has been convicted of. It would have required a waiver for her to be transferred. Not unusual, Kristen, to what a senior administration official told our colleague Monica Alba. People get transferred for security reasons and for other reasons all the time, but not kind of a step down so much in security. Just as an example, over the weekend, Elizabeth Holmes, who was, of course, convicted for her role in fraud-related charges tied to the blood company called Theranos, there were pictures of her taken working out. And those pictures were clear as a bell because one whole portion of this facility has a short fence, no razor wire. There's no extensive gate for cars. So I think it just kind of underscores the lack of security that exists at this particular camp, Kristen.
Yeah. All right. Well, I know you'll continue to follow all of the angles very closely. Tom Winter, as always, thank you. Appreciate your reporting. Coming up next, Texas state officials seek a court order to remove the House's top Democrat as his party digs in after fleeing the state to block a Trump-backed redistricting effort. My interview with one of the Texas state Democrats who's on the run. Stay with us. You're watching Meet the Press now. Welcome back. Turning to Texas with new developments on the redistricting showdown that's playing out in the Lone Star State and all across the country. Texas Republican Governor Greg Abbott filed an emergency petition with the Texas Supreme Court to remove House Democratic Caucus Chair Gene Wu from his seat. Now, Wu is one of dozens of Texas Democrats who fled the state to block the start of a special legislative session and a Trump-backed plan to draw new lines for the state's congressional districts. Abbott's move comes as Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton says he will ask courts to declare some Democratic seats vacant if members don't return by Friday. And at the White House yesterday, President Trump said he may get the FBI involved. Look.
The FBI get involved.
Well, they may have to. They may have to. So a lot of people are demanding they come back. You can't just sit it out. You have to go back. You have to fight it out. That's what elections are all about.
Meanwhile, the group of Texas House Democrats who fled to Illinois were evacuated from their hotel after receiving a bomb threat earlier today. The lawmakers and their Democratic allies say they will not be backing down and pledging to take their fight nationally. Here's DNC Chair Ken Martin.
We are not going to roll over on this. We are going to fight with every single lever of power. This is not the time for one party to, play by the rules and tie one hand behind the back. We are done playing by the rules. We are going to fight fire with fire. And if they want a showdown, damn it, we're going to give them a showdown.
Texas State Democratic Representative Jolanda Jones. She is one of the Democratic lawmakers who have fled the state. Representative Jones, thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate it.
Hey, Kristen, thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Well, a lot to discuss, and I want to start with this bomb threat that was made toward Texas Democratic representatives who had fled to Illinois, like yourself. This happened earlier today. What can you tell us about what happened?
So first of all, I don't want the story to be about this. So all I will say is, yes, it happened. We're safe, and it is not stopping us. We are marching on.
Do you have any security concerns, though?
I feel safe.
Okay. Well, we will move now to the latest out of Austin. Of course, Greg Abbott, your governor, is trying to get the chair of your caucus removed from his seat. Ken Paxton is threatening to start removing members from their seats. Is this going to have an impact on you and your fellow Democrats?
No, it's not. First of all, neither the governor nor Ken Paxton have the power or authority under Texas law to remove us from our seats. Let's be clear. There are two ways to remove us. There's removing you where it has to, first of all, there has to be a quorum to do that, first of all, which they don't have a quorum, which is why they're whining right now. And it has to go through the House and the Senate with quorums on both. And then they would literally need, assuming there was a quorum, which is not going to be, they would need 12 Democrats to go with them. And we'd have to be voted out by 100 members. So you need 100 for a quorum, and then you need 100 votes, and then it'd have to go to the Senate, and they need 2/3 of the Senate's, and then it would go to the governor. So that's not happening. The second way you could be removed is to be expelled, and each house can expel their members. And the way you expel someone is to have 100 people there, which again, they don't have because we have a quorum break going. And then they'd have to have 100 people vote to expel you, which again, they're not going to get 12 Democrats to vote to expel us. So it's an empty threat, and I ain't scared.
Very quickly, I mean, could this go to the state Supreme Court, which is majority Republicans?
The Constitution of Texas determines how we can be removed from the House and the Senate. So the governor can't trump, pun intended, the Constitution, and neither can the Attorney General. He can't trump the Constitution either. There would have to be a constitutional amendment put in the Constitution where 100 people have to vote on it in the State House, and then it would have to go to the voters of the state of Texas to change the Constitution. So I'm going to say it again. The governor should know better. He's a lawyer. The Attorney General should know better. He's a lawyer. And so, no, I'm not worried.
Well, let me ask you about some of what we're hearing from your colleagues. Your colleague, Gina Hinojosa, told us yesterday that the end game of all of this and of this exodus out of Texas is to basically get these new maps put aside, killed forever. How do you actually make that happen, Representative Jones? Well,
so if they never get a quorum, then they don't get these maps enacted. If we manage to get all the way until the elections in 2026, they're just going to go with the current lines. So that's what you do. You don't give them a quorum.
They are fining you every day. I know that some of that may be being paid for by outside groups. Does that deter you? Does that worry you? I hear your defiance, but there's a practical piece of this as well.
So do you see this look on my face? Do I look afraid? I ain't scared. I ain't never been afraid. Okay, ever. Trump doesn't scare me. Abbott doesn't scare me. Paxton doesn't scare me. On a personal note, I was with my dad when he committed suicide, when he blew his brains out. Any day that I'm not suicidal or that someone isn't killing themselves in front of me is a good day. I have breath in me to fight, and that's exactly what I'm doing for my constituents in Houston, Texas, that deserve to elect a representative of their choice in Congressional District 18, which has been racially gerrymandered so that Black people and brown people in Houston literally can't choose a representative of their choice. And they literally took one of those seats. They did the same thing in Dallas. And you know what? I have an obligation to fight for their right to elect their representative, and specifically, but generally, we're saving America. In 2024, the Republicans racially gerrymandered in North Carolina. They stole 3 seats, and I'm going to say this again. Trump is a thief, so it doesn't surprise me that he's trying to steal the election in 2026 and steal 5 seats in Texas. And so people didn't pay attention. I don't believe it to be a coincidence that the Republicans right now in Congress have a 3-person lead, and that came from those 3 Republican seats that they created, that they stole from Democrats, and people weren't paying attention. And had those seats not been stolen, that big, ugly, nasty, terrible, racist bill would have never been passed. And had Congressional District 18 had someone in it, like me, for example, we would have voted against it and it would have failed. So there's nothing more important than saving my constituents' right to elect the representative of their choice, and tangentially to freaking save America from this despot.
Well, we're so sorry to hear about your father. We appreciate your sharing that part of your story with us and that perspective with us. Let me ask you, look, we have heard a lot of Democratic governors and politicians talk about meeting fire with fire. DNC Chair Ken Martin, for example, said Democrats are, quote, done playing by the rules. Do you want to see Democratic-led states respond in kind? California, New York, and beyond.
If California and New York
and Illinois
can make 100% Democratic congressional members, go for it. Because here's the problem with Trump. He's a bully, and he's a liar, and he doesn't respect anyone or the Constitution or democracy or us. So if that's what you want to do, you started it, we're going to finish it.
All right. State Representative Jones, thank you so much for your time today and your perspective. We really appreciate it. Coming up next, Health Secretary RFK Jr. cancels nearly $500 million in vaccine contracts. I'll talk to a former chief of the CDC about the fallout. You're watching Meet the Press now. Welcome back. Health and Human Services Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. continues to reshape America's vaccine policy. Yesterday, announcing he was terminating contracts that focus on developing mRNA vaccines. In addition to ending those contracts, which are estimated to be worth nearly $500 million, Kennedy announced HHS would also wind down investments in mRNA technology. The announcement is drawing swift criticism from the medical community, including from the former director of BARDA, the group within HHS that works with pharmaceutical companies to develop vaccines, who warned cutting mRNA development now puts every American at greater risk. Joining me now is Dr. Richard Besser, former acting director of the CDC. He's now the president and CEO of the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation. Dr. Besser, thanks so much for joining me.
Great to be here, Kristen.
Well, it's great to have you, as always. I have to just start by getting your reaction to Secretary Kennedy's decision to cancel those contracts.
Yeah, for 4 years, I ran emergency preparedness and response at the CDC. And one thing that's clear, we don't know when the next pandemic will come or what it will be, but we will have another one. And to be as prepared as possible, you want to make sure that you can make vaccines that are safe and effective quickly, because time is of the essence. What the secretary has just done is to take away one of the most incredible tools that I've seen develop over the past 30, 40 years. mRNA vaccines are the reason why, back when this pandemic hit in 2020, in less than a year, we had so many safe and effective vaccines against COVID. It saved millions of lives. That was something that the Trump administration moved forward under Secretary Azar. The idea that this secretary would now unwind that and take away that tool is, to me, shocking and extremely dangerous.
Let me play you a little bit of what he had to say about this decision and get your reaction on the other side. Take a listen.
mRNA only codes for a small part of the viral proteins, usually a single antigen. One mutation and the vaccine becomes ineffective. After reviewing the science and consulting top experts at NIH and FDA, HHS has determined that mRNA technology poses more risk than benefits for these respiratory viruses.
Your response, Dr. Besser?
This feeds into the secretary's anti-vaccine agenda. He is one of the nation's leading anti-vaccine proponents. When he became the secretary, he said we should not take science advice from him because he's not a scientist, he's not a health professional. And he pledged to have radical transparency. The idea that he would release this announcement on social media rather than at a press conference with leading scientists explaining their rationale is typical for the way he has been functioning in this role. And it puts people here and around the world at incredible risk.
Well, just to that point, Dr. Besser, in addition to this latest announcement, Secretary Kennedy has already taken several actions at HHS to end COVID vaccine recommendations for kids and pregnant women, gutting the CDC's vaccine advisory panel, even raised the possibility of firing members of the task force that provide guidance of preventative health services. What does all of this mean for our broader public health and, quite frankly, people's trust in those institutions?
It's extremely damaging. He removed from the advisory committee all of the people from the medical organizations you would want at the table. The Academy of Pediatrics, the organization that represents internists and family doctors and elderly patients and infectious disease experts, saying that having them at the table put in bias. You want people who know something at that table, but unfortunately, that's not the way they're moving forward. What it means for me, I practiced pediatrics for more than 30 years, And I always looked to that committee for the advice that I needed as a pediatrician to provide the best care for my patients. And unfortunately, we're not going to be able to get it there. We're going to need to get it from other organizations and societies. My advice to parents, to the public in general is the same. Talk to your doctor, talk to someone you trust for your medical advice. Don't get it from politicians who really don't know the field. Get it from someone who knows you so you can get your questions answered. And I think when you do, you'll decide, like I did, for my children and my patients, to get them vaccinated fully and on time.
And Dr. Besser, quickly before I let you go, we're seeing all of these headlines about more tick-borne illnesses nationwide. The CDC is reporting that Lyme disease, other diseases from ticks are on the rise. What should parents know about this season, and how can they protect their families?
Yeah, it is that tick-borne season, from April to October. It's an important thing if your kids are out in the woods to check them for ticks. A number of concerns, as our climate changes, some areas that didn't have ticks before are having them now. And I'm very concerned that with a lot of people losing health insurance, if they have a rash, if they have a fever, if they have something from a tick, many people will not have a doctor to go to ask those questions. So, prevention is the best thing. If you wear white clothing when you're out in the woods, you're more likely to be able to spot that tick. But if there is a tick, you want to remove it quickly and safely with a tweezer. If you can't, go see a health professional who can help you with that.
All right. Great advice. Thank you so much, Dr. Richard Besser. As always, we really appreciate your joining us.
My pleasure.
Coming up after the break, testy town halls and a potential in-person meeting between President Trump and Vladimir Putin. The panel is next. Welcome back. As the saying goes, 3 makes a trend. So by that measure, there's now officially a trend of U.S. senators running for state governorships. Tennessee Republican Senator Marsha Blackburn announced her candidacy for governor in a social media video this morning. She just won re-election to the Senate last year. She joins Colorado Democrat Michael Bennet and Alabama Republican Tommy Tuberville as 3 senators in relatively safe seats deciding to run for governor in 2026 rather than remain here in Washington. Joining me now on set is Audrey Fahlberg, political reporter for National Review, Donna Edwards, former Maryland Democratic Congresswoman and NBC News political analyst, and Brendan Buck, former advisor to House Republican Speakers Paul Ryan and John Boehner. He is also an NBC News political analyst. Thanks to all of you for being here. Audrey, let me start with you. What do you make of the fact that we have 3 senators who are now opting to leave the Senate and make a bid for the governorship?
You're right that lots of people are tiring of Washington, lots of gridlock here. And even among Republicans, clearly President Trump is looking in his second term to cement his legacy. But as we saw with the big, beautiful bill, there were a lot of divisions over how that got, figured out. It was a long, fraught process. But also her jumping in and all those other 2 senators you mentioned is a reminder that 2026 is going to be a big year for governor's races. 36 governor's races. We only have 2 this fall in Virginia and New Jersey. Next year is going to be fun.
It sure is. And we're going to be watching the governor's races this year very closely as well, Brendan. But I want to put up some of Marsha Blackburn's launch video and have you respond on the other side.
Trump is back. America is blessed, and Tennessee better than ever. I believe in Tennesseans, and I'm ready to deliver the kind of conservative leadership that will ensure our state is America's conservative leader for this generation and the next.
So, Brendan, a lot to discuss about her candidacy. 1, will Trump endorse her? You see he's featured prominently there in the launch video. And 2, what could this mean for Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth? He was eyeing a potential run for governor. This makes it a little bit more complicated.
It sure does. Marsha Blackburn already obviously won statewide. You would think in any normal circumstance she would sort of clear a field and certainly with the normal Trump support. Hegseth has reported looking for an exit ramp potentially. Yeah. This, to me, feels like he probably won't have that clear of a path. I don't think that he wants to leave that post as DOD secretary. I don't get any sense he's being pushed out. I don't think you leave and then get yourself into a messy primary and potentially lose that. Now, Marsha Blackburn is maybe not the smoothest politician. She clearly knows how to play the Trump game right now. So she's not, I want to say that she's unbeatable. But certainly she has built a clear record of standing with Donald Trump in a way that, combined with her statewide, previously winning statewide, you would think that she's got an inside track.
Yeah, and her video just speaks to how prominent of a role President Trump will play in her campaign. Donna, let me turn to you and the Democrats. I want to play a little bit of what we heard from Senator Bennett and get your reaction to that.
You tell me what the Democrats' education policy was in the last election. You tell me what the Democrats' health care policy was. You tell me if Democrats had an immigration policy that made any sense. So I'm not here to blame them for that, but that's part of what we have to figure out as well, because if we don't figure it out and we keep losing elections to Trump or whoever comes after Trump, the answer is we'll never solve it.
And Donna, that, it seems to me, continues to be the question. What is the real plan and message and strategy moving forward? What do you make of what we heard from Senator Bennett? Is he right?
Well, I think, unfortunately, we shouldn't be here sitting in August trying to figure out what the plan and the strategy and the message is. I think that really speaks to some of the disarray I think that Democrats are facing right now. I think the questions that Senator Bennett has raised are important ones. It's not just enough to be against Donald Trump. Democrats have to clearly define how they would govern differently, what they would do differently, and that hasn't completely come through yet. Look, it's not over yet. We're just on the verge of getting to 2026, but Democrats need to get there pretty quickly.
I'll just add, I might say in the short term, I don't know that you need all of those things. I think short-term politics, you can just be against the president. And we've seen that election after election after election. If you're just against the incumbent president, it tends to work out for you. Where it doesn't work is long-term. If your party never defines itself as what its values and what it stands for, that's how you end up with a Democratic Party that should be riding high right now. Historically, the outside party should be riding high, but their approval rating is so low because they have been defined by their activist base, because they don't have leaders who have set out clear policy visions, and that's the mess they find themselves in. They may still take back the House. I think they probably will.
Donna?
I don't know about that. I mean, I think Democrats are finding their way. They have outlined some very specific opposition in this big, beautiful bill, which I think is important because those are things that help to define the Democratic Party.
That's so interesting, Donna's point, because, Audrey, I mean, we have this discussion. The big, beautiful bill seemed to be the focus the weekend that it passed. And then a number of Democrats started focusing on the Epstein files and other issues. What are you hearing from your sources? Is there concern that that could cloud pocketbook issues, which coming out of 2024, a lot of Democrats said that's the winning ticket?
Yeah, I think the problem is Democrats are just cycling through different things to oppose. So at the beginning, right, it was Elon Musk. Now we're seeing opposition to the big, beautiful bill, opposition to Trump's deportation strategy, just things to oppose and oppose. It's interesting looking at people like Ezra Klein, who are putting forward an abundance agenda. Here's what Democrats should be for. But even still, I think in the next election cycle, we're going to continue to see activist groups continuing to get in the way, handing candidates questionnaires about with litmus tests about what to believe. And I know there's some folks on the Democratic Party who are trying to get rid of that. But, yeah, it's a tricky spot for Democrats now.
Well, look, it's not hard for Democrats to say we support Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security. It's not hard to say that Democrats support making sure that families have the ability to make their way through this economy. Those are easy things. Those are things that are clearly in opposition in that big, beautiful bill, and there are opportunities for Democrats to really define the Democratic Party.
Brendan, let me talk to you about the Republicans. President Trump said something that got a lot of attention. I want to play it, and we'll talk about it on the other side. Take a look.
Do you agree that the heir apparent to MAGA is J.D. Vance?
Well, I think most likely, in all fairness, he's the vice president. I think Marco is also somebody that maybe would get together with J.D. in some form. I also think we have incredible people, some of the people on the stage right here. So it's too early, obviously, to talk about it, but certainly he's doing a great job, and he would be probably favored at this point.
This is the furthest we've heard President Trump lean into the idea of J.D. Vance being the standard bearer of MAGA. What do you make of what?
Yeah, that's a huge improvement for J.D. Vance's standing. I mean, famously, he sort of said, "Yeah, no, I don't think he is." It shows you how loyal J.D. Vance, though, has been. I mean, no matter what Donald Trump does, even if it's in direct contradiction to something J.D. Vance had said previously, he rides with him. And obviously, that's what matters. It's also very clear Donald Trump doesn't like the idea of somebody else being in charge right now. It says it's way too early. I think it's notable that he also mentioned Marco Rubio. Marco Rubio's got like 6 jobs in the administration right now. He clearly likes what he's doing. So any vice president is going to be sort of the next in line naturally, but the fact that Donald Trump is sort of opening the door and putting his arm around him a little bit right there should, I think, maybe freeze up a few other people who were thinking of potentially getting in at some point.
Audrey, what do you make of that and what we heard from the president really leaning into the idea of a Vance run and underscoring that Vance has played his cards pretty smartly so far?
He has. And this is also the second time that, or maybe it's been multiple times, that he's mentioned Marco Rubio unprompted when asked this question, right? I think at this point there's no incentive for him to offer his ringing endorsement of a candidate. He is the kingmaker. He loves being president, Trump. Why endorse somebody this early? When he's still the president.
All right. Unfortunately, we're out of time. We'll see how it plays out. Thank you for a great conversation, Audrey, Donna, and Brendan. We will be back tomorrow with more Meet the Press Now, but the news continues with Hallie Jackson right now.
We thank you for watching, and remember, stay updated on breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or watch live on our YouTube channel.